Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I am here today at the Rock Island Auction House. I'm taking a look at some of the guns they'll be selling in their February of 2016 regional auction. Yes, it is 2016 already. So actually, over this series of videos, I'm going to take a look at a number of different Polish firearms, and today we have a Polish rifle, sort of, kind of a German rifle. This is a Gewehr 29/40, which outwardly and in pretty much all respects looks like a standard German K98k. There's good reason for that. It mechanically pretty much is. However, there's an interesting bit of history behind these, and it's one of several Mausers that the German military used as sort of substitute standard rifles that have some interesting stories behind them, despite the fact that they outwardly look just like K98ks. So the story here is that the Polish National Arms Factory was located in the town of Radom, which, by the way, has commonly been used as the name for guns that came out of that factory, which is kind of like calling Colts Hertfords. At any rate, when the Germans occupied Poland in September of 1939, they captured this arms factory intact and pretty much like still running. I mean, I think there were pretty much machines running, parts being made as the Germans walked in the front door. Certainly the factory wasn't bombed, it wasn't shelled, it wasn't damaged. And what the Germans got here was not just the machinery and a group of potentially skilled laborers, but they also got a whole mess of firearms parts. So the factory had been producing largely Polish WZ-29, Wzór 29 rifles, and also pistols. And we'll look at some of the pistols in some of the other videos we do here. But they took this model of 1929 Polish rifle, and it took a little while to get things back up and running, but they realized this was basically identical to their Mauser rifles, which it was. One of the main armaments of the Polish military coming out of World War I was the Gewehr 98. They had updated this to the WZ-29, where it was basically a copy of the standard Mauser rifle of the day. The Czechs made it, the VZ-24, the Belgians at FN were making Mausers of the 1920s pattern. This was basically the same thing, and it's really the same as the German K98k, with the exception maybe of a few details like sling swivel location and front sight hoods and little minor elements like that. So what the Germans realized is we've got parts for tens of thousands of rifles here in various states of completion. Why not make some use of them? We could use some more rifles. So what they did is they actually put the plant, the Radom factory, which was Fabryka Broni, FB, you'll see that marked on a bunch of their guns, they put this under the control of the Steyr company back in Austria. And Steyr went about making use of all the parts that were left over. And in this case, they're making Mauser rifles. So there are several different variations of these based on their markings. At the very earliest, there were receivers that were basically complete. They had the Polish National Eagle crest on them. They were marked FB Radom and dated 1938 or 1939. And so you'll find some of those overstamped with the Steyr 660 factory mark. And then, of course, there were a lot of receivers that were not marked or had existed only as forgings that hadn't been machine finished yet. And Steyr used all of those too. And this particular rifle is kind of a mid-range example of those. It's 1940 dated. It's marked 660, which is Steyr's identification code, but it doesn't have any of the original Polish markings. However, we can also see, and I'll show you up close here, this is marked G29/40 on the side rail. The reason for that is the side rails of the receivers had originally been marked WZ29 by the Poles, and the Germans would either cross out the WZ and put in a G, and then they'd add a /40, because this was this project of rifle completion was started in 1940. In total, by the way, about 55,000 of these rifles were made, and they were pretty much all done by relatively early in 1942. So you'll find them marked 1940, 41, and 42, in addition to the original pre-marked Polish receivers of 38 and 39. So by 1942, this had pretty much wrapped up. The parts they'd used up the parts that they had captured with the Radom factory. They didn't actually use the factory to produce brand new rifles, although they did use it to continue producing brand new pistols, which again we'll touch on in another video. But production kind of shut down at that point of rifles. Now, one other interesting side note to these is they are also marked on the stock with a Nazi eagle over a letter. And it, depending on the rifle, it could be an H, it could be an M, or it could be an L. And that designates what branch of the German military the rifle went to. Now, it's interesting you have to remember that while this is basically indistinguishable from a K98k other than the markings on the receiver, it's not actually a K98k made in Germany, and thus it was considered a substitute standard or a second-line weapon. Military units with the highest priorities would not have gotten these. They would have gotten German-produced K98s. So there's actually some suspicion out there among some high-end collectors that this may have actually been sort of a paperwork trick to get some lesser priority units equipped with totally modern rifles like this. Because this is under the bureaucracy, according to the paperwork and the officialdom, this is a second-rate rifle because it's Polish made. So getting back to the letter here, most of these were actually issued to the Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe was not a high priority recipient of small arms. They've got aircraft. They're not really in need of a lot of rifles the way the Army might be. And so this is kind of a clever way for the Luftwaffe to have gotten their hands on actual good rifles for those Luftwaffe ground troops who needed them. Now you'll also find them with a letter M. That's for the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, who didn't get as many, but the Navy also has need for rifles for things like security guards and boarding parties and landing parties and that sort of thing. And you will also find them, a fairly small number of them, marked with an H, and that is for Heer, which is the German Army, H-E-E-R. This one is actually Army marked. It's got the H on it. So a kind of cool way to get a little bit more information about where a particular rifle went, more than you'll often find on a standard German rifle. So just to correct any potential misunderstanding people might have, the Poles get a lot of flack and have kind of a poor reputation in the United States. In reality, these rifles were extremely well made. A very high quality production line at Radom, and they're excellent guns. The Germans found them to be excellent. They worked very well. And they're a really interesting addition to a German rifle collection or a Polish rifle collection. They're one of those cool elements of something that kind of transcends a couple of different categories, which I particularly like. So if you'd like to have this one yourself, it is, of course, coming up for sale here in February of 2016 in Rock Island's regional auction. If you check the description text below, you'll find a link to the lot with this rifle. It is actually paired with a second rifle. So I'll let you go over to the catalog and check out the other rifle and decide if you would like to have them both. Thanks for watching.